Coursing is a tradition on China's central Shanxi plain. It's also highly competitive. It was on this very land, over 2,000 years ago, that Liu Che, the Emperor Han Wudi, used to hunt and would establish his great imperial forest park. It was the largest hunting ground of China's imperial ages. The Emperor's forest park has been lost to history, though greyhounds course the ground. Do any other traces of the Imperial Forest Park still remain?
我从小在村庄里长大，过去的20多年里，我一直在做一件事，用绘画和雕塑的方式做村庄题材的作品。我想留住村庄的记忆，因为村庄正在远去。
It was pure chance that led Li Xiaochao to discover the history of the land which he thought he knew so well, and its previous life as the emperor's pleasure ground.
师傅飞沙流壁，冯将官，好，埋伏楼花到，顶住！
我实在难以想象，面前的红土地曾经盘桓过一座水草丰美的园林。我不禁对那个2000年前的皇家禁园产生了好奇。上林园究竟是一座什么样的园林？我还能找到它留在今天的痕迹吗？
这古代咱老多人那个弄这屋里结构最好的，后面有个后院子。
村庄大多数的时候是安静的，老人们总爱坐着闲聊，有时候说个故事给娃娃们听。
是吧？茄子。行不行？
不行，
不行，
不行。
其实2000年来，上林园的故事一直都在村庄里口耳相传着。
The young emperor, Han Wudi, loved to hunt. One day, when out with his entourage, they rode through the crops of some villages. The angry farmers rushed out to confront him. As the situation threatened to turn violent, the emperor was forced to reveal his true identity to the mob. Discomfited by the affair, he began to plot his imperial forest park. The preceding Qin dynasty had an imperial park outside Chang'an, modern Xi'an, where livestock was kept. After the dynasty fell, the land had been reclaimed by the peasantry, and villages sprang up and crops were planted, which set the scene for Emperor Wudi's unpleasant experience. After returning to his capital, he put forward his plan for re-establishing the park. One of his ministers opposed the plan. The minister said depriving farmers of their land for the sake of the emperor's pleasure went against the principles of good rulership. Liu Che agreed and rewarded the minister with 100 pounds of gold. He then ordered the recreation of the imperial forest park in any case. Villages were demolished and hundreds of thousands of peasants were moved off their land and resettled elsewhere in Wudi's expanding empire. The new complex boasted 36 small gardens and 12 separate palaces. It was established not just for the emperor's pleasures of the chase, but also of wowing and wooing visiting dignitaries from far and wide. The emperor imported exotic fauna and flora from all corners of the empire and beyond. Dates from Persia, grapes from the western regions, and areca nuts from Vietnam all took root in the gardens. The park was so large, some 600,000 acres, that it was said snow still lay in the north while the spring flowers blossomed in the south. The Qin Mountains marked its southern edge, and the 8 great rivers ran through it. Its size and scale were unsurpassed in the whole of Chinese imperial history.
如今，商乐园变成了茶余饭后老人们嘴里的故事。今天的村庄一片祥和，听不见马蹄铮铮，看不到利剑穿梭，哪里还有商乐园的一丝踪迹？
However, the villages do not unconsciously betray the secrets of their imperial past. Li Xiaochao begins his search for the evidence that will confirm the truth behind the legend.
"小时候，高高的城墙是我生活的一部分，以至于我对它熟视无睹。而今天来到村庄里寻找胜利，我突然对这个无比熟悉的事物产生了疑问：在古代，边境的城市才有城墙围绕，我的祖先们为什么要在关中附近修建城墙呢？"
调查的，对，哎，你好，麻烦问一下，咱这个城门这啥时候修的一个城门？
哎呀，这个城门是那个时候，咱就听人说，就是主要就是防那个野蛮子那些匈奴那些，所以这一块修的也比较早的，大概应该是在汉那个时候就开始了。外边来的人，不是这村的人不能进来。啊，
那他从哪看呢？
他就从这。 这
哦，对的，这两个样，对，
两往三，
这两往四，
两往四，人家就爬到里边就能看到外头是谁进来了，是这个村子人吗？是，门开开，不是，对不起，你不能进来。
这现在这么近的，这过去让爬。
这个等于下的这个地方垫高了。我小的时候在这块儿，哎，那就根本看不到，手都扒的，根本都看到。
距离大约1米多
啊，看不到这个东西。对对，要踩着这个。 踩着这个小层子上，
小层子扒上，
扒上来才能亮这个面。
Incidents such as this quicken Li's hopes. He feels sure that the past is all around him, just waiting to come back into view. But to understand it all, one has to know what has occurred in all the intervening centuries. The landscape must be read just like a book. This drum and gong performance goes back to the folk rites of the Noir opera in the early imperial era. At its climax, the musicians stamp on the drum, symbolizing that they've taken the ground. The dance has a decidedly martial tone. Masks are a key feature of Noir opera, but as this local folk variant developed, the full-face masks were replaced by eyes, made from walnut shells. In addition, horse bells, red waistbands, and tiger's head-eye masks all have their own symbolic meanings. However, the key feature is the assertive and vigorous expression of the dancers themselves. Carnival events were once staged in the Imperial Forest Park. The Spring Festival was celebrated by all levels of society, with acrobatic performances being widely recorded. For the emperor, these great circuses were meant to show the coming together of peoples from all parts of his domain.
乡民的笑容很灿烂，神情又很专注，让我不禁想起曾经在博物馆里看到的汉代百姓俑。他们得意忘形地扭动着身体，努力地释放着快乐，与我们想起就像一个模子里刻出来的一样。但是这种想象的背后又隐藏着什么呢？
杨家伙这汉俑，咱现在看跟秦俑其实有很大的差异啊。秦俑写实一些，汉俑比较写意。这个线条它都是弧线型的，对，不像秦那直线的比较多。哎，秦俑都比较严肃一些啊，它有很浪漫的那一面，比较富有想象力。
The Han pottery figures reflect the mental outlook of the era. By the time Liu Che ascended to the throne to become the emperor known to history as Han Wudi, the Han dynasty had been firmly established for half a century. This was a luxury unknown to the previous Qin dynasty.
这个高个子，这个
高个子这个现在在结合文献来看的啊，高个子俑，这个气质形态象征的应该是关中人，
江阳人，
在关中人，
关中北京人。哎，好。看，跟我这看，快。这么多年来，关中人的长相都没有改变过，头大面宽。 脸上尽是刀刀砍砍，好像记录着这块土地的苦难变迁。
老汉的脸上还吃的圆的，旧社会这包袱一到西安，一到凤阳都说临春这是那小北京，
小北京，
好不是小北京，北京又说临春又说的，到我，
下面有黄河，风水好。
到我这个。
Shuangquan village was built on the site of a Western Han Dynasty granary. Broken tiles are evidence of its imperial past.
这是回纹砖，这是汉代的，这是汉代建筑的面砖，啊，这是装饰砖。你像当时的建筑，这个表面上肯定都是富丽堂皇的。过去说秦朝汉王治的就这，在这个地方主要是过去为就是这个省内院的建筑，为保障京城的吃喝，粮食从关东从函谷关以东那个方向过来以后。 到这儿来储存加工，这儿有个水槽，一直是水通到长安城，有150多公里。有了这个水槽，有了这个运输，就有了船工。
对，是这样的。
哎，有了船工，就有船工号子，有了船工号子，就是后来形成现在老像那个拉坡，后边拉坡声，就是船工号子延续。哎。
女王啊，娘娘不留情啊！
他们的肺腑之言也没有改变过，仿佛雄浑的土地下面传来的声响，又像来自历史深处祖先灵魂的呐喊。
As the Imperial Forest Park was expanded, hundreds of thousands of craftsmen from all around the empire were brought to Chang'an. This put a strain on local food supplies. To counter this, Liu Che had grain transported to Chang'an via canal. The boatmen, who hauled the barges, sang work songs to ease the strain and keep their efforts in harmony. Those rough work songs eventually evolved into Laoqiang opera. 2,000 years on, Laoqiang opera still reverberates across the countryside of the Shanxi plain. In the center of the park, a giant copper figure was erected. Together with its dais, its overall height was around 67 meters, equivalent to a modern 27-story building. Under Liu Che's long reign, the Han Empire reached its zenith, and his ambitions extended far beyond his forest park. In the southeast, Liu Che successfully annexed the various states of Yue. In the northeast, he expanded his writ into Korea. To the north, he subdued the Huns, allowing his armies to head northeast, securing the Gansu corridor, and opening up the overland Silk Road to Central Asia. For Liu Che, the world was but one giant hunting ground, ripe for his taking. Wei Zifu was to become Liu Che's second empress. She'd been a humble singing girl in Liu Che's elder sister's palace. When the Princess Guantao saw her brother's interest in Wei, she gave her to him as a gift. But Liu's existing empress had the girl forced to serve as a palace maid. Wei Zifu had no chance to meet her imperial lover. When, after many months' service, Wei was due to be dismissed from palace service, she caught the emperor's eye again. Now able to ignore the demands of his estranged wife, Liu Che had Wei installed at the Imperial Forest Park. She became pregnant and gave birth to the emperor's much longed-for heir. For years, Liu had been dogged by his first wife's inability to bear him a child. This had led to insinuations as to Liu's manhood and his suitability to rule. Wei Zifu's successful delivery of Liu's son was thus a cause for great celebration, both personal and political. Even today, on the Shanxi Plain, the birth of a son is cause for a special celebration. The continuation of the clan and the family line brings all the community together in exuberant feasting. The stone carvings from the Han Dynasty are like mirrors through time, reflecting the scenes of life 2,000 years ago. Ham, salted fish, fawn and fowl for slaughter, and a man holding a fan with one hand while barbecuing meat with the other. Scenes such as this you can see in China to this day. The pleasure of the feast are another constant in China's history. In his imperial forest park, Liu Che threw many banquets. Foreign dignitaries would come to court favor with the dynasty and in return be treated as honored guests. For the emperor, this was also an occasion to demonstrate the power and wealth of his empire. On one occasion, he had wine served in cups so large the guests were unable to raise them to their lips. Instead, they had to lower their heads and lap from their bowls like dogs. The emperor would have been secretly quite gratified. These half-buried stone carvings might have borne witness to the event. Maybe history is never completely lost.
我似乎看到那个雄伟的年代留下的记忆，一直流淌在关中人的血液里。它赋予人们一种本能，在苦难里保持平和，从平淡中汲取快乐。2000年来，关中人一直都是这样的自信、坦然、雄心勃勃。
Li Xiaochao paces out the centuries beneath his feet. For him, past and present have become intertwined. What would happen if they were to meet? Li decides that in his painting, they will. In their stone carvings, the Han have left us indelible images of life as it was lived 2,000 years ago. Li Xiaochao has a rubbing taken to inspire his new work.
这大概是有点帮助。他这个小孩啊，我看这个小孩他做了个什么东西啊？
应该是一个凳子。
一个凳子。
这个花样石的珍贵之处，其中有一个方面就是这个画面当中，生活气息比较浓厚。你看哈，这个小孩坐个凳子上面，在牵着牛鼻。
啊，牵着牛，对。那好像这个牛和这个马车应该是
是对应起来。
对，建筑外边。而且它的画面都是有些画像砖，他们讲究满构图，不让空间闲置着。汉代画像石里的每一根线条都可以朝任何方向延伸，组合成不同的形状和图案。它们随意又充满童真，与这块土地上的闲适质朴的生活多么契合。这种古老的技法唤醒着是我对这块土地最真切的感受。今天的村庄仍然重复着画像石里的生活。当我站在羊肠的空地上，看到豆子飞向空中时，恍惚觉得那是从画像石里抛洒出来的豆子，落在今天的土地上。茂盛将领周而复始，村庄就是这样过着自己的日子。2000年前，我们的祖先用画像石刻画这块土地上的生活。而如果俯瞰今天的观众，土地和土地上生活的人，不就像一块活动的巨型画像石吗？一口叙说千古事，上述队伍北万兵，曾经的生死兴亡融进了平息高昂苍凉的表演里。但在这块土地上，生死搏杀的历史剧情并没有完全消失，而是通过另一种生命延续下来，在观众大地上不断的上演。
One winter's day, Liu Che was hunting in the Imperial Forest Park with one of his most trusted generals, Huo Qubian, and his minister, Li Gan. It was to be a day of blood. On a winter's day 2,000 years on, the greyhounds are ready to course the hare. 2,000 years of life and death runs its course still.
从汉朝手里，这就是皇家，汉人家一个狩猎场。这个西部是由皇家狩猎品种，它就是黄花嘴、柳叶耳、羊小公、春香涧，尾巴就是像蝎子一样。
The hunter always has his prey in mind, and the hunted can, on occasion, be taken unawares. The unsuspecting Li Gan was one such. Huo Qubing's arrow struck him dead on the spot, before the emperor's very eyes. The emperor was shocked by what he saw. He realized how vulnerable he himself might be. The purported reason was revenge for an incident 2 years previously when Li had injured Huo's uncle, Wei Qing. Wei was also the younger half-brother of the empress, Wei Zifu. Wei Qing had forgiven Li for the original incident, but the punctilious Huo was not prepared to let it pass. The Wei Huo faction held sway at court, with both Wei Qing and Huo Qubing being successful in leading military campaigns against the Huns. But the struggle for influence in the imperial court was complex and ceaseless. Plotting and dark deeds made the emperor ever more fearful. One of the manifestations of such fears was the great wall he had built around the forest park. When first built, the wall ran for over 200 kilometers, with 12 city-style high arched gateways. Trespassers were not welcome. They could expect a summary execution. Seclusion replaced the openness of the plain. The villages of the central Shanxi plain are still surrounded by walls and defensive cliffs, perhaps a legacy of the emperor's cautious ways. The people there now live their lives in harmony with the rhythms of nature, rising with the dawn and retiring at dusk. A picture of bucolic simplicity. As the emperor grew older, his worries for his own safety blossomed into full-scale paranoia. Persuaded by one court faction that his Empress Wei Zifu and their son, the Crown Prince Liu Ju, were plotting against him, he abrogated their privileges and forced them into suicide. When the emperor discovered he had been tricked, he turned his vengeance on their accusers. The Han dynasty was to fall not once, but twice in the years that followed Han Wudi's death. After the capital shifted to Luoyang under the Eastern Han Restoration, the Imperial Forest Park fell into decline. The land was reclaimed by the peasantry to whom it had once belonged. In 237 AD, Emperor Ming of the Wei dynasty asked for the copper immortal to be brought before him. Legend has it that the immortal shed tears as he was taken from the park. In Chinese thinking, to rise and to fall are but two sides of the same coin, completing the cycle of life.
当我完成圣乐园成圈的时候，突然发现那些山川河流、园林村庄都不重要，真正带给我力量的是生活在这片土地上的乡亲父老。从历史到今天，一路走来的是他们千百年来淳朴的生活、朴素的情感，从未改变。
Li Xiaoqiao's scroll of the Imperial Forest Park is over 10 meters long. It includes scenes of life familiar to people today and scenes from history, of hunting, palaces and processions. Among these scenes of the past and present, which are real and which are their shadows? One old man reoccurs in several scenes. He is a storyteller, a witness to history, and a symbol of the generations nurtured by this land.
《韶关文茶》用的是绿粉、粉抽和茶香，截然不同的两极，创造出了是一种新的和谐。我的画里，历史和现实也是两极，但是它们比自由穿梭的线桥模糊了界限，成为可以任意打破的空间。历史里充斥着现实，现实中也包裹着历史。我的画里没有更多的色彩，因为白天和黑夜加起来就是村庄全部的生活。我的画由不同的线条组成，那是观众大体从来没有改变的激励结果。我画里的人物没有五官和表情，那是古往今来无数张面孔的结晶，喜怒哀乐全部置之骨髓。
Attachment to the soil is one of the deepest rooted in Chinese culture. The land that fed you and which nourished your growing body is quite literally part of you. The people of the Shanxi Plain are tough, descendants of the soldiers with whom Han Wudi, Wei Qing and Huo Qubing held off the Huns. Now, their struggles take on a different form, wresting a living from the arid Los soil on what was, once upon a time, the emperor's private pleasure ground.
小时候，母亲在镇上教书，1个礼拜回来一次。每个周末的黄昏，我都会守在家门口，等她回家。母亲还没有到村口，夕阳就把她长长的影子送到村里的土路上，那是我心里最温暖的记忆。从那时起，我就迷恋上了影子和线条。